and welcome to the PlannerPod, the podcast of The Planner, which is the official magazine of the Royal Town Planning Institute. I'm Laura, the Planner's news editor, and with me today I have editor Simon Wicks and senior news reporter Ben Gosling. We're recording this pod just ahead of Royal Town Planning Day, which is on Saturday the 8th of November, and this year the RTPI is launching a public awareness campaign. It will celebrate the positive impact of planning across the UK, as well as the people behind it. The campaign aims to highlight the work that planners do across all nations to help build places that are sustainable and affordable for everyone. Stay tuned to the RTPI socials for more information. And with that in mind, with us today we have Nouvella Kusi, Planning Policy Officer for Milton Keynes City Council, and Mahsa Ige, founder of Urbanist on a mission to talk about all things social media and how it can be used to promote what you, planners, do. To get us started, can each of you give us a snippet, perhaps a highlight reel, about what you do and where we can find you? And how did you get started with social media?
Yeah, so I'm happy to go first. Thank you for having me. My name is Mahsa Ige, and yes, I am the founder of Urbanist on a Mission, where I provide planning advice, but also sustainability engagement. So that can look like a lot of different things, from events, training, social media, of course. And then I also act as the subcommittee lead for the RTPI London and also an ambassador for the Let's Build group. So your question around sort of why social media and how I got started, well, it was actually back in 2019 for me with Instagram, and I had just come off my master's where I studied global urban development and planning. And it was just so exciting to come out into the world and see planning everywhere. And I'm sure a lot of planners can relate, where you sort of start studying and learning and think, God, yeah, the road is also planning, my school is planning, my workplace, my home, everything is planning. And I really wanted to share that information with people because, interestingly, most people didn't know what on earth I was doing. They didn't know what my planning degree was about or what I wanted to do going into the planning profession. So Instagram was a really great place to translate that into a visual and text-based case study.
Amazing. Yeah, I'm Nouvella Kusi, as has already been mentioned. And my story is similar, slightly different. So I made a career change into planning. And prior to that, I had a little awareness of planning because of the job I was in at the time. But I really wanted to get immersed into the world of planning. So I just started an Instagram page to actually consume other people's content, to see what was out there. And I realized that it was only because I had an interest in it that I was able to sort of really delve deep. But for the average person, it wasn't necessarily the most engaging content if you weren't in the world of planning already. So during my master's, I started putting together posts, and then I paused because work and studies required a lot of my time. But then earlier this year, I believe it was, or towards the end of last year actually, I picked it back up and I decided I was going to give it a proper go. I changed my style as well because I really wanted just friends and the average person to know more about planning, similar to Messa. I just was surprised that not many people knew about this profession and how much it really impacts every aspect of our lives. So that's how I got into content creation.
Great.
With that then, how do you make decisions on the content? If you've seen it and decided or thought it perhaps wasn't that engaging, how do you make your decisions on content, and then how do you make that stand out?
The content was always informative. I just found that if people weren't looking for the information, I don't think they'd stop to really engage with it otherwise. So I tend to find topics that I know will relate to a community, a group, or what's going on currently, and try to pick up on sort of certain planning concepts that I can relate to it and sort of explain. So it is topical. I did start with an approach where I just sort of break down the fundamentals of planning. So what is planning permission, things like this. And then there were specific scenarios where there was actually a lot of commentary on social media about certain developments receiving permission, and you could just tell there was a lack of understanding about the process, about how people could get involved. And so I use that as an intro into sort of talking about particular concepts, helping people to understand how they can get involved and what was actually going on with that particular process.
Yeah, so I would say my approach is actually quite different. Throughout the lifetime of my Instagram, I've worked in private sector, public sector, now freelancing. And I've always had such amazing conversations with people, not just planners, but whether it's retrofit coordinators, council officers, community members. And I just always would think, God, wouldn't it be good if other people could hear this conversation and learn from it and actually have some insight into how these projects come to life? And for me, planning is so interconnected. You really can't separate the issue of health or housing or waste or, businesses, economic viability, site use, all these different things, right? So my reels in particular were essentially a response to this and saying, okay, well, if I'm having these conversations anyway, how can I record them, share them, and then they can live on? And I think we're really bad as a profession at capturing our case studies, which is such a shame because so much great work is going on. And I think a lot of the narrative is around under-resource, lack of skills, financial strain. And although all of those things exist, I think those positive news stories can be really inspirational and actually useful as far as knowledge sharing. And then sort of thinking about what potential other opportunities there may be in your given area. So that's why my Instagram reels are a little bit all over the place. We'll be in one part of the country one day speaking to an architect, and the next day somewhere else speaking to a council. And I think really the whole point of that is to showcase the breadth of what planning can be.
So just to backtrack a moment, you both operate purely on Instagram, or do you do TikTok?
So I'm purely on Instagram, and the reason for that is because it is just the platform I prefer. And I think this is something I would say to anybody who's interested in sharing content. It can be really tempting to think, oh God, I have to be on absolutely everything. If I want to grow or be successful, I need to be on TikTok, YouTube, X. And I think for some people, again, if growth is your priority, that makes sense. But actually, to be sustainable in producing content, I think you need to really dig deep and remember it should be your own personal outlet so that it's something you A, want to do, and B, can do consistently, because otherwise you're just going to drown in multiple different platforms that maybe don't suit you.
And how about you, Nouvella? You just Instagram?
I am also on TikTok, but I do agree with Mahsa because I think depending on what your goal is, the content that you post on one isn't necessarily suited to the other. Because I typically do reels, in the past I've done sort of photos, but typically do reels, mine can be repurposed, but I don't post everything on both because also it's the type of interaction you get on TikTok doesn't necessarily suit videos that might be better suited for Instagram. I feel as though TikTok is great for getting a message out there. However, people won't necessarily always engage positively. So I think the sustainable approach is to use one platform. I have chosen to use two, but as I mentioned, I don't share everything on both.
So I think we'll get into some of the things you've touched on in a few minutes. But just very quickly again, for the benefit of our listeners, I would describe your approaches to your reels as being really quite different from one another.
Yeah.
So Mahsa, I would describe you more as the journalist going out, being on screen, the broadcaster with a microphone, interviewing people at locations and projects. Whereas Nouvella, we don't see you on screen, or we see little glimpses of you. We see a hand or the back of your head or something like that. You're more about sort of quick edits, fast-paced, fast-moving things, voiceovers, bright words on screen.
Yeah.
Other people's words. You both sort of prioritize other people's words.
I mean, is there a sort of particular reason that you've chosen these kind of two different approaches?
Let you go first, Nouvella.
Yeah, sure. So I decided from very early on, I didn't want this to be about me. I wanted it to be about sharing information, introducing people to the world of planning and its breadth, as Mass has already said. But I was aware that the way social media is headed at the moment, or for a little while at least, is that people buy into other people's stories. And if there's not a person in front of the screen, how do I make this engaging? Because there's a lot competing for people's attention, and the nature is just to scroll quite quickly. So the bright colors, the fast edits was just my way around the issue of creating engaging content when people don't initially see a person. I am aware that it can't all just be buildings. That's why you see the back of my head at some point and a slither of my face. But honestly, I didn't see the need of a person or myself being in it when actually it was more about the content itself. And I think it was just more suitable and a comfortable approach for me. But I do really enjoy Massa's style as well. I was just telling her earlier on, actually. Yeah.
Well, I mean, we hear your voice.
Mm.
That's the thing. That's the personal thing. It's not an AI voice. It's your voice.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Massa, how about you?
Yeah, well, I would say I think I also really enjoy Nouvella's content, and I think you do such an excellent job of still being engaging, despite not having your face as part of the thumbnail or sort of overly taking part in the video. But I think for me, look, like I say, when I started this, it was about sharing planning in a relatable way. And the post might be a little bit cringe if you look back to 2019, but the goal was really to give planning a different identity, one that meant that you could see a real person engaging with a real place. And maybe it's not somewhere you've been before, but it reminds you of somewhere you've been before, and it can inspire thoughts and potentially action, actually. So that's why it's consistently on my page been about faces as much as possible. And I think as an industry, it's so easy to stereotype, whether it's looking at, I mentioned council officers, but they're the problem, or developers, they're the problem. And we have this idea of this sort of faceless character that I really wanted to challenge by giving a name and a face to what these projects actually mean. And that includes myself, to be honest. I thought it wouldn't be fair for me to spotlight people if I wasn't prepared to also get myself in front of the camera. And I think it goes beyond even just job roles. I think also in this industry, even though it's well intended, I think sometimes we can say we need to engage with this community group or people with this background. But I think although there's a place for that, it's really important to remember that we are each the sum of multiple different parts, and our identities are part of multiple different intersections. So I wanted to tell these stories in a very real, authentic way. And again, for me, that just meant being in front of the camera.
I mean, Massa, you're based in London, and Novella, you're Milton Keynes, which are two places with real kind of planning heritage. And do you kind of root your content in these places, or is it more sort of here, there, and everywhere?
My content is definitely here, there, and everywhere, not even necessarily just UK based. And that's partly because I have not always been London based. I've also lived in many different cities and sort of different countries as well. And I think actually in keeping with the theme of Town Planning Day and actually all the brilliant work that Helen's doing as our TPI president to raise awareness about planning, I think we need to remember as an institution, we are global, and that we can learn so much from what other cities and towns have done and what other community groups and councils have done. And I think it would be a shame not to sort of use my platform as a way to speak to these different people. As an example, I did a video based in Bratislava with the Metropolitan Institute, and the work that they've been doing around child-safe cities, I think is so fantastic. And I had a few DMs, direct messages from council members who contacted me off the back of that and said, how could we use their case study for some of the work that we're doing? So I think it's all about shared learning, and I don't think that has any boundaries.
My content has found its way to focus on planning scenarios in London. That was unintentional because I agree with Massa. I think there's so much we can learn from best practice or things that have produced great results in other cities and countries. So I am still very open to broadening where I base my content. I actually haven't done too much on Milton Keynes, to be honest, because I also don't want there to be any overlap. Obviously, I work there and I find my work very interesting, but it might not necessarily be appropriate to share certain things ahead of time. I did recently do content on a mural though that was launched at the beginning of the month in Milton Keynes at Station Square, and I thought it was a great example of how that sort of public art can sort of transform a space. Literally the week after, I saw parents and kids using the space to play, to cycle, just to congregate, and I thought, wow, no one would have stopped here before. People would just use it to pass through to get to the train station. So that inspired a piece of content, but typically I stayed away from content based on Milton Keynes, and I'm looking forward to doing content sort of focusing on other areas of the UK as well. Yeah.
Just as a quick aside, that mural is going to feature in the next issue of the Planner.
Oh, amazing.
In our photo shoot, we've interviewed Sir Michael Lyons, who's the head of the New Towns Task Force.
Amazing.
Photographed him in Milton Keynes with the mural as a backdrop.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah.
Exciting.
So when you're planning your content, when you're thinking about your content, when you're putting your reels together, can I ask you, who's your audience? Who do you have in mind? Who do you think is listening to this, or watching it rather?
I think our answer might be quite similar, although our approaches are quite different. My content is really for everyone. I do want it to be for the everyday person, but I do want it to be content that other professionals look at within the planning sphere, and sort of whether they're inspired by it to do their own stuff, whether they've learned something about what's going on in a particular part of the country or London that they didn't know about. I did want it to be content that everyone found engaging. If I think about what initially sparked my desire to create content, it was more the non-planning person. However, it wasn't exclusively people outside of the world of planning. I don't know what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely spot on that we've got the same answer. I would say for me, it's very important that it's content that's open to absolutely anybody. And again, my whole thing is very much that planning affects all of us and we can all affect planning. So with that in mind, I like to have a bit of a surprise attack with my content where it's like, oh, we're talking about this thing that may not seem planning related, but let me tell you how it is. So that's why, again, it's a very diverse set of content, but actually, hopefully in that, there's something for everybody. And it may be that some of my stuff doesn't resonate with somebody, but hopefully eventually they'll find something that does. And again, I hope that is more inspirational for that person to then go away and say, oh, I might actually contact the person in this video because I'm working on a similar project, or say, there's nothing like this going on in my area. What can I do to help encourage more of that?
How planned ahead is your content, or is it quite spontaneous in order to reach those audiences and get out there to as many as possible? Do you put a lot of planning into it?
I do put some planning into it, but there is a degree of flexibility because for me, it is important that the content is relevant. So if something's happening at the moment or something's just happened and people are talking about it and there's a way to tie that or to demonstrate how planning influenced that outcome, best to get on it as soon as possible, because I want there to be a degree of consistency and frequency to my posting. I've planned other bits that can then be slotted around that. So there is a degree of planning, but I try to be flexible as well.
When you're putting your content together and you're thinking about this sort of wide audience of planners and non-planners, how does that affect the way you frame planning concepts and the language that you use?
Yeah, so I think it's really important with any form of public engagement that you're conscious of things like technical terminology or abbreviations and really fleshing that out. But I think it's also important not to underestimate the knowledge that most people have when it comes to their built environment. I think it's more about positioning it in a way that can speak to both people who are more technical and those who aren't, whilst also teaching something new. So it's important, I think, to straddle those two different points.
I definitely try to simplify my language. I have been in positions where, because of that, I've been asked to speak to a certain group of people, and because I don't have the ability to edit and rejig things, I find it's so easy to slip into the technical terminology and use phrases, words that other planners are used to, and I'm really trying to not do that with my content. So I'm very intentional about sort of writing a bit of a script beforehand for the voiceovers, But I also, so that's obviously for the non-planning people, but I also have learned that other planners have been inspired by that because they've sort of reached out and kind of expressed appreciation for the fact that I've been able to demonstrate sort of certain concepts and explain things in a way that is so simplified, and that they want to do something similar so that they could get the people in their world sort of engaged and understanding more about planning. So
Because some of your pieces have actually sort of directly addressed questions like what is regeneration? What is gentrification? What is planning? What was sort of going through your mind? Why did you pick those particular things like regeneration, for example?
of course, I think there's just so many assumptions, and we see the end result of something, and also situations that are impacted by so many other factors. But the non-planning person finds it very easy to sort of lump things together. So with regards to the what is regeneration question, I wanted to really separate the fact that regeneration is about renewing a place and doesn't always necessarily result in what they assume it is, which is gentrification. I think it's really clear to distinguish between these things because when there's misinformation and misunderstanding, that's when planning gets a bad rep. When actually the intentions of planning and regeneration, for the most part, is always positive, is always to improve the area, improve living conditions, to improve sort of sustainability. And I think people just see things change and even if the things haven't changed yet, and it's been announced that this area is going to be regenerated, instantly we're jumping to the worst case scenario. And so that topic is a hot topic, I think, for people outside of planning. So I wanted to really target that question and hopefully shed some light. But I don't think it's a one video topic, it's a continuous conversation. So I'm glad I've started that, but I'm looking forward to coming up with new ways to emphasize the point.
And how's the response from your non-planning audience been?
Overwhelmingly positive. I've been I guess moved by how many people have reached out. I wasn't really expecting any kind of response, but people have reached out and expressed we need this type of content. We need help understanding how we got here, and I'm so glad that this exists. That has been more on TikTok than on Instagram. And that's sort of breaking down how we get to certain points. For instance, one of my pieces incorporated the idea of opportunity areas that was introduced in the London plan. And so kind of tracing things back so that people understand how this area was selected for regeneration and things. And loads of people had sort of a penny dropping moment, which is what I hope to achieve. So there was a lot of positive feedback. As I mentioned, you do get the odd person here and there who focus on what the outcome appears to be, such as gentrification and planet. Well, actually, the narrative tends to be that certain organizations don't care, and not necessarily planners specifically. So thanks for this, but it's not going to do anything. And I've always sort of tried to take an approach whereby that's not internalized, because ultimately, eventually, if they consume enough of the content, they'll realize that maybe they can rethink how they've framed this.
Yeah, I think it's interesting just going back to what you were saying about change, because in my experience, most people want change.
Mm.
Almost everybody I speak to says, oh, there's this thing in the area that needs improving, or actually, the air quality is affecting my children in X, Y, and Z way. And so I think this narrative that people are against development, in my experience, simply just doesn't seem to be true. I think what is lacking is that conversational piece, and actually not waiting till the end or near the end to have it. And also, I think it was great that Nouvella said it's an ongoing conversation. I think, unfortunately, it's very difficult to achieve, but actually making sure that there's that trust building exercise and those platforms and mechanisms that are constant, even if a development isn't happening, right? People still feel like they have an avenue to express what they feel and think about their area beyond sort of local plan consultation phases. So that's where I think with my content, equally, it's been really nice having that feedback and getting a lot of different messages all about, I didn't know this was a thing, or I didn't know this was happening, or, I didn't even know there was a national planning framework, and that you could just find this all online and it's freely accessible. So I think the issue that I'm noticing and hopefully that I'm trying to solve is that a lot of this great stuff is already out there. It's just in so many different places, happening in so many different ways. I think people are really craving a one-stop place they can go to better understand at least a general sense of what's going on in the world of planning, either affecting them directly or indirectly.
One of the things that you do very well, Mahsa, is you root your reels in community projects. So some of the recent ones, you've visited the Chelsea Physic Garden, for example. You've done some other community gardening things as well. There seems to be a lot of nature. The bat walk at the World Wetland Trust in Barnes was really interesting as well. So you're sort of rooting people's environmental concerns or interest in natural and green spaces into their built environment as well. I mean, how deliberate is that? Just an interest that you have, or is that a kind of strategic decision that you've made?
So I would say it's not necessarily an interest that I have in the sense that I'm equally interested in sort of energy efficiency, housing, and so many other things. But I find that with my content, it's not particularly planned out. It tends to be whatever comes up at a given point, and then just really seizing that opportunity and making sure it's captured. Like I said earlier, if these conversations are happening anyway, or if I'm invited to speak at a particular event, I take the time to make sure I'm capturing that for a video or for content, because I think, wow, so valuable for people here on the day or in the room. But what about all the people who didn't even know that this was something that they could attend or come to, right? So that's a big part of it. And then as far as the nature piece, I think a lot of people, when they hear sustainability or green, all these buzzwords, they think of a tree. And that's absolutely fine because trees are great, and they play a very important role as part of sort of biodiversity net gain and planning and all the things that are topical now around climate mitigation and adaptation. But I think it's really important to make sure that we're connecting that to wider planning issues. And I'm actually really happy that you mentioned the community piece, because I think when I say community, I also mean the planning officers and the professionals, because we're all part of the same community, right? And I think by showcasing that, it can really help make the world of planning more tangible. And actually, for those who do associate nature with their built environment, that's the first step. And then they can go from that piece of content to, oh, okay, that links to bats, which are also a protected species. Didn't know that. And then how that relates to actually a lot of obstacles in the planning system and what may delay housing delivery. And so the conversation continues on, hopefully, off the back of that.
With all your content and what you're trying to do, have you received any negative feedback? And if so, how do you deal with that? Because it is something that planners get quite often in their professional life.
Yeah, so I would say I'm a weird one, I quite like I say challenging comment, not negative comment. Because so this is the thing, right? I think a lot of the reason why we don't have more content like this across planning is because, fair enough, people are scared about that level of exposure. But I think if we're going to address the polycrises we have now across socioeconomic issues, political issues, environmental issues, we just have to get more comfortable with the uncomfortable and not let perfection get in the way of good. I think oftentimes, particularly anything comms related, people want to be careful of what they say and how they say it. But I think there's something really powerful in just sort of cracking on with it. And if you do get those challenges or people who disagree, trying to figure out the best way to address that in an honest and authentic way. And not everyone will be happy with that. But I think at least, again, it's a conversation. And if we say we want conversation, we can't necessarily tell people how and what that conversation looks like. I think we have to be open to it. Saying that, I think sometimes you will get some slightly more rogue comments, if there's something that's outright racist or irrelevant on the post, which is just a not so fun part of the internet. In that case, I have hidden comments, but I'm a big believer in not deleting them. Not because I think there's a right or wrong way about doing that, but just because I think it's important to reflect honestly what sort of goes on in the comment section. But I think if it's not relevant to the post or the conversation, then at that point, I don't think it needs to be sort of front and center.
I agree, and I couldn't have put it better myself. The point you made about conversation was the point I was going to make. We can't sort of predict how conversation will go, but some of these negative comments have given me the opportunity, particularly on TikTok, to have an ongoing conversation in the comments section that has been quite productive. And then other people decide to chime in a positive way. So it's always a learning opportunity. I don't think I've received any personally negative comments, but as Massa said, the internet is the internet, and you will get some people who are just having a bad day and want to unleash that onto someone. So I have also hidden a comment or two on TikTok because it was just completely irrelevant to planning, let alone the topic covered in that post. But I do think that making the decision to positively engage with negative comments is also an opportunity to continue a conversation and help people learn things and challenge assumptions about what planners do and what planning is, and the impact of whatever development or planning decision is the topic of conversation. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think there's a lesson there generally for planning that it can't be top down and imposed on people. It's got to be the product of a conversation and kind of dialectic. So you both obviously work aside from doing social media. How have your employers reacted to your social media work? Have they been supportive? Is there maybe a kind of level of, them asking you to focus on particular things or maybe avoid a particular issue? Or
There was definitely a positive response to the fact that I create content and have this aim of spreading the word, sharing more about planning. Um, I don't. One of the things I'm trying to get on top of is consistency, because the truth is, when work is busy, the content isn't a priority. And so I have had gaps where I've not posted for maybe a month or a few weeks at a time. And that's just because there is preparation that goes into these pieces. And I personally like to do reading around it if it's a topic that I'm not as related to, close to. There's not been anything that has interfered with day-to-day work that would raise any concerns. I think within Milton Keynes Council, there's been the desire expressed to do more storytelling, specifically around what we do at Section 106 funds, what that goes towards, and how that's positively impacted our communities. So the storytelling piece and the spreading the word is something that we are prioritizing. This is obviously separate to work, and so when work is busy, work is priority.
Massa, how do you balance? I mean, you're self-employed, aren't you? I think.
Yes, yeah. So I would say the social media stuff is probably the smallest part of the work that I do. So I'm still acting as a planning consultant, and then on top of that, do a lot of work around events and for all different sorts of stakeholders. A lot within the property space, so directly to landlords and developers, but then also, of course, within the RTPI as well, directly to professions. And then Let's Build is actually predominantly architects. So it varies. So the difference I would say between me and Nouvella in that sense is since 2019, the social media has very much come along with me. So I don't find it particularly laborious or actually time consuming. It very much feels like the joyous part of what I do and almost the icing on the cake of what I'm doing anyway. And then I just make sure that that's sort of an add-on that comes along with it. And as far as sort of career opportunities, I think it's something I really recommend that absolutely everybody does, no matter what industry you're in, even if you don't have that support organizationally, maybe because there's a comms team or you don't necessarily have that reach or opportunity for reach. Keep your own scrapbook, keep your own video diary, keep your own blog, notes, whatever it may be, because one day, I think, whether you're applying to future jobs or actually a new opportunity comes up in your organization, it's such a fantastic thing to have to show for, what you've been working on, what you've enjoyed, what you've learned, and then you can even potentially refer back to it for future projects. So I think this idea of creating content doesn't necessarily just need to be for public consumption. I think it can also be for your own learning. And to your question, Simon, actually about people coming and asking for advice or how can we copy this style, or, we liked X, Y, and Z about what you did. How can we replicate it? I've had quite a lot of that over the years, and it's been really rewarding seeing how that's then being translated and modified in different ways for other people to use and keep those conversations going. So yeah, I absolutely recommend it. I think it's likely that you'll get some pushback if you're not somebody who is self-employed, because there will be a certain way that an organization wants to communicate to their wider audience. But I think that's not necessarily a no. I think that's a learn more from them, use that opportunity, and then when the time is right, you can sort of jump on the back of that as well.
Do you need much in the way of, because you're very professional, both of you, in the way that you present your reels and the way they're put together.
Thank you.
Do you need much in the way of technical skill? I mean, is this all self-taught? Did you do courses?
For me, it was self-taught, but I think if you were already on social media, you've got the fundamentals, and the more you do it, the more adventurous you become or inquisitive you become, and you start trialing with different sorts of editing styles. So you don't need to be a social media whiz to start putting content together, and the more you do it, the more confident you'll become. I think that's my stance on it.
Do you use other platforms as well to create your reels?
I do. So I use an app called InShot. I have used the new Adobe app, and I can't remember what it's called.
Premium. No, I know what it is.
Yeah,
we use it as well.
yeah. And CapCut. Obviously, recently CapCut have changed a few things in their guidance and privacy and things. So I have tried to steer away. And Canva, actually, Canva I've used a lot to edit my content. So, but I think they're all quite easy to use, self-service type platforms that you don't need too much coaching on, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. I have no training whatsoever. Planning is very much my bread and butter, and then actually the content creation, as you said so eloquently, I think it just naturally comes if you're somebody who's using social media anyway. And this is why I think it's so important to lean into what you like and what feels comfortable, because already if it feels like a new skill, it's going to be 10 times harder and more off-putting if you're trying to be or do something you're not. Yeah, and then in terms of platforms, same. So if you've got a camera, you're already winning. And then after that, I would say CapCut is quite good. But one piece of advice I'd give, because a few people have asked me this for their own comms teams, and I think where people can go wrong is creating too much content and then going away and thinking, oh gosh, the editing is what's hard. You know, it takes so much more time than people realize. So I would say if you're starting off, keep it sort of short and simple. You don't need 100 versions of the same thing. And then that way you've got less of an editing task and more of a sort of capturing task, which I think is much more easy for most of us.
Have you noticed much of a kind of sort of generational aspect to other content creators or your audience? You know, I think younger people tend to be on platforms like TikTok.
Yeah, so I would say, we both mentioned that we're trying to sort of attract a very wide audience, so not necessarily just young people. And I think you'd be surprised how many older people are also on social media platforms. And already, I think they are the standard audience for discussions around planning and sort of built environment issues. So I would say, in terms of the production of these sorts of this sort of content, then yes, maybe it is more younger people. But actually, I think there's an increasing interest from people of all ages. And then as far as consumption, I think, at least for my content, it seems to be very evenly spread across the board.
The same. I was pleasantly surprised to see that my audience, my typical audience, ranges from a young teen to someone into their 60s. So that's encouraging for me, because I do think young people consume a lot of social media. They're more likely to be less familiar with the planning concepts. So my hope is that loads of young people engage, but I was very sort of happy to see that it wasn't exclusively young people consuming my content as well. Yeah. On both platforms as well, TikTok. Yeah, as well as Instagram.
I have a lot of timers on my apps. I'm really trying to reduce the amount of time I spend on my phone. I don't want to be doom scrolling. How do you manage your social media time as a producer and a consumer?
I am very aware of how much time we can all spend on social media unintentionally. So I'm also very conscious of how much time I spend doom scrolling, and I do limit my use of social media. There's a set amount of time I spend online sort of for personal use, And then I am intentional about scrolling through urbanism content if I can sort of do any content that's relevant. But I do also put a limit on my use of it, also because the time could be used for creating content and other things. So I do think it's important for me to be conscious of how I'm using it, and I can relate. I can relate, Laura. But I found it easy. I found it quite easy to limit my use and to segment it in that way.
Yeah, I'll be honest, I actually don't spend a lot of time on social media at all, which might be surprising. But I think there's an element of, when it's your work, you sort of you don't want to spend too much time on there. So I associate social media very much with that, with sort of learning more about what's going on in the urban planning space or just different community groups. But mostly I'm there to content dump and leave a lot of the time. And actually, a lot of where I consume my planning information is more on websites. Maybe I'm a bit old school, but I love, a blog like the Savills blog has a lot of great sort of news headlines. Obviously, the Planner as well is fantastic. So I don't think you necessarily need to be on social media to get it. But I just, yeah, for me personally, it's very much I get my reels together, my posts together, I put them out there, and then I check out again for the next one.
Who do you follow? Because I mean, one of the things I found is that there's not a huge amount of planning content on Instagram, which is the platform that I use. There's some that's leaning more towards, quotes, urbanism, which was a phrase you used. Who do you look at? Who do you follow? Who would you recommend? And again, this issue between planning and urbanism, where do you sit on that spectrum?
That's a very good question, because I think that's also part of what inspired my content creation journey. There isn't a lot out there, especially UK based. There are a few American content creators, and I think they do a good job, but it's not always easy to sort of engage with if you're not already well versed in planning, because it's based on issues in another country, so some people might not find that interesting. So I follow a few American content creators. I also follow every sort of organization within planning and the built environment that has an online presence. I'll be honest, outside of the RTPI, Mahsa herself, few sort of public figures and thought leaders in our space, I don't really follow many others. There is a guy on TikTok and he's called Joe Gets About. He does interesting content, so I follow him. But, I'd struggle to recommend any others. None are coming to mind. I'm sure there are some out there.
I follow a few people who, for example, like a London tour guide, who will talk about a particular street in London, which is very interesting. It's urbanism. You could refer to it broadly as placemaking.
Yeah.
But there's no connection made to planning.
Yeah.
Which is sort of the missing link from our point of view. What are your thoughts on this, Mahsa?
Yeah, well, I think to echo Nouvella's point, that's why I started it, really, because I just feel like a lot of planners don't want to leave work and start learning more about planning. And I think that's fair enough. And this is where the sort of Trojan horse effect comes in with my content, because hopefully when you're watching it, you don't necessarily think straight away, oh, we're talking about planning. You sort of being able to relax a little bit and enjoy hearing stories from other people, which is what social media is all about anyway, and then learn something more about planning if you so wish to, particularly if you're going to read the caption, because I used to think nobody did. So many people do read the captions and get back to me on that. So yeah, I think as far as other sort of content, I would agree. I think the Urban Planner is fantastic and really good as far as creating bite-sized content around policy, which is never an easy task. But I think I really struggle to find other planning content, at least on Instagram, that isn't either overly technical or overly commercial, because actually they are associated with a wider organization that is trying to sell their services or their projects. Which I don't think is a bad thing. I think you can learn a lot from that, and I really enjoy scrolling through some of that stuff. Look, if there's anything you're missing as a listener that you want to see more on social media, I say be the person who makes it. And you'd be surprised how many other people will thank you for that and really enjoy the stuff you're putting out with your particular lens.
So we're saying that there's a big vacuum there. There's a space there that other planners can move into if they feel so inclined.
Absolutely.
And we're saying actually it's not that difficult.
I agree. Yeah.
Quite an easy thing
That's
to
what
do.
we're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One thing we haven't done, of course, is reference what your particular handles are on social media. So you mentioned Urban Planner. Could you spell that out?
Yeah. It's the Urban Plan Her. So URBANPLAN _ and then the word her, HER. So yeah, just to play on the word Urban Planner.
So, and that's on Instagram
and TikTok. Yeah.
And Mahsa, you are.
Yeah, so you can find me Urbanist on a Mission. Very cheesy name, I know. But I'm on Instagram and I've also got a website. But yeah, otherwise, do feel free to message me on LinkedIn or through Urbanist on a Mission on Instagram. Even if you've got some ideas or you could just use a bit of a chat to brainstorm some of your thoughts, I'm always around and happy to have a coffee.
We will put your details in the blurb of the podcast so that people can find you easily. Just to wrap that up, thank you for your time today and joining us, and we'll see you here soon for the next podcast.
Thank you very much.
Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.